Good evening, everybody. We are here with our final presentation of our presentation series for this year with Graham Meech on the economic geyser activity this last January and Penta Mixed Phase that they saw at the same time. I would like to, since this is our final one, I would like to thank Graham and also all of our presenters during this series. And hopefully we will have some information out very soon, and we will be doing this series again next year. And watch our social medias or all of our normal avenues of communication for more information about that a little after this series ends. And with that, we will go ahead and go over to Graham.
All right. Thank you, Will, and good evening, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic activity that I was fortunate enough to see in January, and hopefully the rest of you will be able to see this summer. And the Penta Mixed Phase is just really an ongoing interest that I've had in Penta and what to look for and what you might see there. So I'm going to do two sections here, and I'll pause for any questions you've got after I've done the economic piece and then do the shorter piece on Penta. So get into this, a little bit about me. I think a lot of you may know me. So 1993 was the first time I went to Yellowstone. I got in 93 or 94, I'm not quite sure. So I spent 3 nights at Lake Hotel cabins and 3 nights at the Old Faithful Lodge cabins, and went to Norris and then Sorrentinas, which was my first geyser that I got to see. Got intrigued about all the patterns that you see in the geysers and the different types of behaviors from the features. And a couple more years, I went back for a week or so at a time. And then in 1997, I really got kind of serious about it. I had planned to go hiking for a week in the Tetons and then spend a week in Yellowstone. But as many of you know, 1997 was a great year. Giant was active, and intervals were like 10 days to 14 days or something at the time. So I changed it up so that I was going to do 2 weeks at Old Faithful. And since then, I've been in the park for 2 weeks at least every year. And I still haven't been back to go hiking in the Tetons. So it's become my passion to go watch geysers. I've been going since 2007. I started going every year in the winter. So I've been there for a week every year since 2007, except for 2021 when the Snow Lodge was not open. So you're going to find me wherever the odd stuff's going on, like Geyser Hill disturbances we've had, or down at Morning when it's active, or Ledge, as you can see from the picture there from Pat. But you'll often find me at Fountain too, because that's my favorite geyser that I can see pretty much every time I go to the park, except maybe the winter. So the agenda today, I'm going to talk economic and talk a little bit about the history. I'm going to talk about what I defined as minor, normal, and major eruptions. Look at some statistics that I captured while I was there. What to look for the end or the start of a series, and some views of it, and a little bit of the current activity now too, what East Economic does. And then I'll switch to Penta and talk about some of the build-ups, what you might see leading up to a mixed phase eruption. So getting straight into this, so economic. So prior to January 2024, there's really not a whole lot of information. I know Dark Cross did a wonderful write-up in the last spot on the historical information. But if you go out and look at geyser times, which is our best easy to get to reference, there's 2 eruptions in 1975, 2 entries. And then the next entry for an eruption was 1997. So there was a report that visitors had seen it in 1997. And then there's one report in 1999 of an eruption that was inferred based on the smell and bacteria wash. So very little on geyser times prior to this year. Then we moved to December 2023, December last year. Ranger AJ Ferrara returned after the break for getting ready for the winter season. And they noticed on 6th of December that there'd been some chunks of white debris, sinter debris in the runoff area. It was completely clear of bacteria mat, which had been there before. The runoff channels are scoured, so that really was good evidence that there had been some eruption prior to the 6th of December, and nobody really knows what happened. So That was the first report of an eruption in 25 years. So that was exciting, and it increased my interest when I went in January. And so on the 7th of January, I managed to see it erupt. So I arrived on the 6th, kept an eye on economic just to see what it was doing, and the water levels were going up and down. You could see overflow, and then it would drop just within the top ring of the crater, and then it would come back up again. So it was pretty easy to watch because the boardwalk is right by it, and there's a nice bench and a pull out there to sit at and watch from. So it's very easy to watch the overflow activity on the geyser. And then on the 7th, which is the big day, I did my usual early morning walk out. I stopped at Grand and got basically a walk up on Grand at 7:33 in the morning. Then I wandered around the Sawmill Group to see what the status of all the springs was there, since I hadn't really checked it when I walked up. Slurp was the only thing going. And then I wandered down to look at Economic, which was part of my daily plan. Go check it out. And as I'm walking down past Topsoil, I see it erupt. So it's like, hey, this is great. And so I'm kind of shuffling my way down the boardwalk, taking some video, and trying to stay upright and not fall over. So there's a picture of it in the early morning light on the right. It's still a little bit dark around 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. It's still not really very light, but the eruption lasted long enough for me to get all the way down to the bench and actually see it without the steam blowing in my face. So that was the first observed eruption report anyway for 27 years. So that was pretty exciting. And then of course I stayed there and didn't really know whether there would be a series or not, but there was. So that was really fun and exciting. I made some definitions while I was there for what was a quote minor, a normal, and a major eruption type. There were some variations in the durations of the eruptions, and so it was something that I was just trying to keep track of while I was there in the park. So we have a video here. This is what I call the minor eruption. They're short duration, but they can get pretty high in height. Typically 10 to 30 seconds, not very long. And the intervals were often about 5 minutes after they happened. So on the right, you can see the crater. So during the eruption series, the water was sitting down below its normal level. Its normal level would be out near this orange, brownish ring around it. That's where it would sit below overflow. And then when it overflows, it would be coming out. So you can see there's not much. You can see some flecks of sinter out here. And I'll just go ahead and play the video for you. So it's a pretty short and sweet eruption. It does pretty much fit the economic name of all the water basically stays within the crater. It did not really overflow for this minor type of eruption. And I'll just play one more time so you can see it again. So most of the eruptions I saw were minor eruptions. They were fairly short. Like that, maybe a little stronger and taller. That was one of the shorter ones, but it did have sunshine on it, so that's made it nice. If we move on, sorry, go to the next page. Okay, to the what I call normal eruptions. They lasted longer, so they were typically in the 50 seconds to a minute and 20 seconds, somewhere around that. So definitely noticeably longer than the minors. They usually had some pauses, and I really wish that I'd been tracking how many pauses occurred during different eruptions, but it's winter time. It's hard to do that type of stuff. It sometimes had intervals about 5 minutes after it too. And you'll notice as it starts up, there's a few small splashes. When I had sometimes that's all it would do. It would just do tiny little splashes, and then they would stop. And then I at one point I started logging those as eruptions, but later on I decided, they're not really eruptions. So I'll let you see this. You'll also see some overflow. This is the small splashy stuff. And then it gets going. Stops and restarts. And you see the overflow too. So at the end there, you can see the waves coming over the platform, creating runoff. Those kind of waves over the edges would push the little flakes of cinder down across the platform. And I'll play it one more time. Okay, so that's what I defined as a normal eruption. If we move on, obviously major eruptions are bigger and better. They last significantly longer. They typically had a much more vigorous first burst. And durations, you can see like 1 minute 45 seconds, and the longest I saw was 3 minutes and 20 seconds. So quite a bit longer, definitely a lot longer than the minors. And these often led to a longer interval afterwards. I don't think any of them had a 5 minute type interval afterwards. More volume of water, maybe taller. I would say the top height was about 20 feet, over 3 people high. But it is a little hard to judge with all the winter steaminess and the generally gray sky in the background. But I'll go ahead and play this one. You can see, one thing before we start, right down the bottom here where the cursor is, there's a big chunk of cinder that's broken off. During my stay there, I could see it moving its way slowly, getting pushed out by the eruptions. So I'm just going to play this one and shut up. Okay, so that's what the major type, what I define as major types, and again, this is just stuff I made up on the fly, just to in part to give me something to do while I was watching it, but also to try and see if I can spot patterns and things. And you see a little bit of a pattern as we get into some of the statistical data. After the bigger eruptions, the water level did drop lower in the crater. I'll show you a photo of one of the low spots in a little bit. Okay, so on to some stats. I just did the easy way of looking at stats, and unfortunately, Geyser Times has a nice way for something that's a new geyser. You can get some good stats out of it pretty easily. So I set it up with to look at the intervals in the first plot, cutting it off at the 20-minute interval to give you an idea of the activity. So you can see here pretty clearly there's a peak here at around the 5-minute mark, and then another one around the 10-minute mark, and then some evidence of one about 15 minutes. So historically, there's been reports of it erupting every 5 minutes. So definitely there was a pattern where 5, 10, 15 minutes was significant in terms of the intervals. And even when it did the 10-minute cycles, the water would rise at about the 5-minute points, and it might splash or not. Sometimes it just rose and bubbled a bit and then went back down again. But it typically exhibited that 5-minute cycle, even if it didn't erupt. So that's the plot of the intervals on the right side. It's got the on the horizontal axis, it's got the durations, and the vertical axis, it's got the intervals. And so you can see the cluster here around the 5-minute cycle is generally the short duration eruptions. Slightly longer tends to cluster around the 10-minute. And there's a little bit of a cluster there around 15 minutes, but not too much. And then the longer ones over a minute, you can see it's scattered quite a bit on the right side of the chart. So even some of the, an eruption here for 3 minutes, it had to follow up with it at about 15-minute point. But then you've also got some that are just over a minute that went 40 minutes without another eruption. So gives you a good idea of what's going on. So there is kind of a cluster here, and a bit of a gap in the durations here, and then another bit of a gap in the durations here. So that was kind of my gaps for the definitions of minor, normal, and major eruptions that I kind of started off with, and it seemed to pan out relatively well during my viewing time. But obviously, as happens with all the geysers, they tend to fill in all the middle points along the way too. Okay, so that's some of the data. So yeah, how do you know when a series is going to begin or end? So I'll start with the one on the 7th of January, where I saw the end of the series. It was, as I say, I had the walk-up eruption at 7:56. I have no idea whether that was the initial or not. My guess is it probably wasn't the initial, but I have nothing to substantiate that other than I doubt that I was lucky to see the initial. During that series, I saw 48 eruptions, which was really exciting. And it lasted until 1400 in the afternoon, so about 6 hours that I was able to watch it. And that was good because it got a lot of people out. Some of the rangers came out. Brandon Crows brought some of his co-workers out, so it was nice to get some people out to see it. During that time, there were 3 majors, 8 normal eruptions, and 37 minors. So you can see it was definitely having a lot more minors than it was majors. And after 1400, so what happened? It still did the 5-minute cycles, rising and falling. But then eventually it started to rise without any cycling. So one of the interesting things, Grand erupted not long after that last eruption. So last one was 1400, 12 minutes later we had a Grand eruption. So that makes you wonder, was there a relationship between the two that caused this to happen? I'm not at all convinced that Grand's eruption was signifying a chance for the end of the series. There were other times when it appears Grand erupted and nothing really happened. So, more data might help us see. Maybe there's a chance that when Grand erupts, it can make economic quit, but I don't know. There's not enough information to know for sure. But by about 1436, 2:36 in the afternoon, really it was just doing this a slow, steady rise. So at that point, it really looked like it was done. And even 2 hours later, at 16:45, it was still slowly coming up. I was keeping an eye on it, shuttling back and forth, looking at things at the time, but no evidence that it had had any more eruptions, and it was just slowly coming up, and it was still several inches below overflow. So I think if you watch it having an active series, and then you get to see it cycle, but then stop cycling and just slowly rise, I think that would be a good indicator of an end of a series, and not just going to have a long interval. I think that's the end. But we only have one data point, so it's really, I'm making this up. Okay, so start of the series, I have a little less data on that. So the first series I saw was on the 7th. Next time I saw a series was on the 10th. So a 3-day gap between what I'd seen. I don't think there were any eruptions in between based on snow and lack of activity, the pool's being full and doing the normal cycle thing. So I really don't think anything happened in the 3 days. I did see some bubbles coming up in the pool the day it erupted that I hadn't really seen much before. And it erupted sometime between 12:10 and 14:26 when I was up visiting the hill. So I know it didn't erupt before then. And when I came back down, there was a lot of snow melt. So I know it had at least erupted once. Slightly unusual was that economic was back into overflow. So on the 7th, I did not see it get back into overflow, but maybe it had been going for a whole bunch of hours. Maybe when it starts up, it can refill before it really gets going into a busy series. I don't know. But I did see bubbling increase around 15:10, and then a couple of minutes later, it had a major eruption. So, and at that point, it really did start a series back up again. It erupted until I left at 17:57, so almost 3 hours. And there was still activity the next morning when I came out at 7:50. So my opinion is that it probably erupted all through the night, but that's, I'm just really speculating here. When I came out on the 11th, the water levels in both economic and East economic were lower than they had been on the 10th. So that kind of makes me think maybe it had kept going and maybe it had drawn down its water levels. But I don't know for sure. So if it did erupt overnight, then the series would have been over 25 and a half hours because when I left in the evening, it was still active. So potentially it erupted for quite a bit more, or maybe it did stop overnight and had two back-to-back series. I don't know. But in this eruption series, a little interesting. On the first series, I saw 48 eruptions in 6 hours. This time, adding it up for the 2 days, I saw 47 eruptions over 11 and a half hours. So these average interval during this activity on the 10th and 11th was twice as long as it was on the 7th. And the characteristics were 8 major eruptions, 9 normal, and 30 minors. So you can see we lost some of the minors, and instead of having 3 majors, there were 8, which also supports having a longer average interval during this activity. So I'm it doesn't really seem to have a lot of indicators that it's building into an eruption series. The only thing I really saw was some more bubbling. And I know some people have seen bubbles since then, and no indication of eruption following them. So maybe not much indication that it's going to start a series. But watch for some bubbles. If you see steady stream of bubbles, that was more positive to me. Odd occasional bubbles, not so much. But we really, this is again only one data point where I know it started between 12:10 and 14:26. So we have so little information, but some. All right, so here's a couple of views of when it's not erupting. So on the left, you get the general view. You've got economic here on the left, the bench, which is a nice spot to sit at, and you can see a lot of snow melt around it. So typically it's been overflowing towards ground. There's been a bit of a puddle of water there. I was sitting and watching when I talked about overflow. It was the overflow coming here from economic to go straight under the boardwalk. When it was just doing overflow, you could have a patch on the right, maybe reaching out 6, 8 feet, where it would pool water and melt the snow. So this area here that I'm circling with the red cursor could just be melted with the snow from the overflow. When it erupted and started having its eruptive series, you get these tentacles of snow melt going out. So in the winter, it's kind of easy to spot if you've got snow banks. It's easy to know that there's been an eruption because the snow has melted. So if it typically start here, you get some spreading this way down toward the boardwalk. There's a little patch up there that would started to fill in during the later parts of the series, and then more snow melt would come down here on the left side of the boardwalk, heading towards me here. So that was the typical view that I was looking at in the winter. It was nice that I got some snow overnight, which helped me know whether there was an eruption or not. But we won't have that benefit of it during the summer. So on the right, you get a really good view of the low pool. This would have been after a major well into the series. You can see how low the water is compared to its normal level. Normally, when it's below overflow, the water is up here in this gray band just below the brown ring. So it's pretty high. It's in this outer crater level. And then you can see it at various levels until it overflows and starts to flow onto the boardwalk. But after the eruptions, it would always drop. This is the lowest level that I think I saw it at. And one of the interesting things, if you look at the ragged edge of the bacteria mat or of the crater, it really does look like it's bacteria that's got sintered in. It doesn't look like a nice, smooth, typical geyser crater. The way it's just kind of ragged and straggly makes me think it's just bacteria that's been sintered in place over the years. And again, you can see this big chunk of sinter out here on the right that did slowly move its way out down the runoff channel. But yeah, it's kind of shocking to see economic that low. So if you see it that low, it's exciting. So the other spring nearby is East Economic. It also reacted during the eruption series. The water level drops, and during the first series that I watched, the water level was often sitting in this black band, and then after a normal or a major eruption, it would drop down into the upper areas of this tan-colored band here. And then after the eruption was over, it would slowly come back up again, and then the next eruption will pull it back down again. The minors didn't tend to move it very much, but the normals and major eruptions did. This is the lowest level that I saw on the 11th, which is one of the reasons why, since it was so much lower on the 11th, it makes me, suspect that it may have erupted all night long. But this is the lowest level it got down to, way down into this tan band. And on the 11th, it was really moving up and down quite a lot. Pretty much every eruption made the water level change. But you're used to seeing it full of water, and I'll show you a picture that I was sent recently that where you can see that the water level is, full, which is what you normally expect. So another thing to look out for is the water levels being low down in the crater. So what's happened since I was there? So I was there for a week. After I left, Corbin Cooper was there. He reported some activity based on snow melt. So again, good thing for winter. We get snowbanks built up, and then if they all melted away, something happened. So he saw a snow melt that made it look like there was an eruption overnight between the 17th and 18th of January, and then another one between the 18th and 19th of January. I have no idea whether it had a series or not, but definitely had significant snow melt that would be indicative of an eruption. On the 2nd of February, there's a visitor report logged in Geyser Times of eruptions every 5 to 7 minutes. On the 7th of February, Mike Vogel reported 4 eruptions. He saw a minor and a 3-minute major eruption, and likely more because he was probably having to go rove around. On the 22nd, Jesse Nelson reported an eruption observed from Grand. So we do know that it was erupting actively for, basically from December, January, February, we know there's been activity in economic. And again, likely to be other activity missed as there's hardly anybody there in the basin in winter. But since the park is opened, sadly, there's not much, no really indication of anything going on. Nobody's reported eruptions. Nobody's reported what I consider significant things. Water levels being going up and down. So it's been having overflows and then dropping just inside the rim to its normal low non-active state. People have seen some bubbling. So that's why I'm a little somewhat interested in how much bubbling it has as to whether there's any indication of when it might start a series. But there's have been some bubbling observed. And maybe we'll get some activity later. I mean, sometimes we know geysers. Some geysers don't like the amount of water that builds up in the winter from snowmelt. So maybe if it dries up, it'll get more active. Or I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. But again, it's good to see that it did have at least activity through late February. So now I have a few recent pictures. I want to thank Dan and Bryce for sending us photos since the park opened. So Dan sent the picture of economic and East economic. So you can see on the left, economic geyser, it's still hot. There's no bacteria build up there. So that's good to see. Sorry. You can see the water level here is about here. So it's in what I would call a relatively low level, but still way up on the outer crater, outer ring. And you can see East economic on the right there, full of water. No indication of a drop in the water level there at the moment. Bryce sent a picture of Wave Spring, which you can see some breakup of the bacteria in the center. Maybe it's heating up. I guess I hadn't really paid enough attention to it in the winter, other than noticing that it was full. But maybe there'll be some energy there. So maybe some other people can post some info on Geyser Times to keep us informed. All right, so summary of this. Again, what you can look for, obviously snowmelt. Although my comment there says hopefully there's not too much of that around this summer. So, but all the while, I mean, there's some snow today, so that could help somebody figure out what's going on. Obviously, you can easily see it from Grand. So those of you that are sitting out there waiting for Grand, keep an eye down basin. It's not far away. It'll be easy to spot the big steam cloud from it, and its location is very distinct from any other features in that area. No trees blocking your view of it. You should be able to see it quite easy. Obviously, if you see really low water levels, down into that inner crater, not just in the upper outer ring, that would be interesting to me anyway. And if the water is cycling up and down about every 5 minutes, that would be potentially a sign that it's had an active phase, or maybe it's going to have one, or what. But based on what I'd seen, the only times I saw it with water that was down in that inner crater and cycling every 5 minutes was when it was in a series. You could look at East economic for its water level, and normally it's full. We're used to seeing that. But if you start seeing it below full, then that would be an interesting thing. Please note it in Geyser Times if you do. Maybe that would be an indicator. I have no idea how long it took to refill after the series was over either. You can look at the runoff channel. There's a lot of white center chunks in it that were there, and they get you can see them bouncing down out away from the crater during an eruption. So if you see the white center moving around all over the place, or big chunks breaking off, or anything like that, that's obviously noteworthy and potentially indicating a series has occurred. And again, the only time I saw a steady, pretty strong stream of bubbles coming out was just prior to one of the eruptions on the 10th. So if there's, I didn't really have much chance to look at a whole different types of bubbling, but if you do see some bubbling, keep an eye on it. Maybe you'll see some variety, and maybe that will leave us to some ideas about what it's going to do. But again, as I say, we really don't have much information. The bubbling, we don't really know too much about. All of the video clips are on YouTube. If you want to go look them up, just look for Graham Meech. They are out there. You can replay them if you wish. I think I was going to pause here and before going on to Penta and ask if there are any questions or comments on the economic part, and I'll turn it over to Will to MC. Okay, I can barely hear.
So if any of you have questions for that first part with economic, go ahead and drop those into the chat. That's good. We can do them at the end.
All right. Can you hear me now? Okay. So starting again, Penta Geyser has had lots of mixed phase eruptions in the last couple of years. To some extent, I think they periods of long periods when it's been happening probably once a day, at least. So they're fun to watch, and I'll give some people some clues as to when to see them. Um, before you get a Penta Mixed Phase, they're occurring about 15 minutes after Sormal and Spasmodic both finish long eruptions. And we've been putting them in geyser times as minor eruptions to distinguish them from the full-out water phase eruptions. A lot of the time, Sormel has some of the short eruptions that are a minute, 20 minutes, stuff like that, an hour. But then it will have longer eruptions that are 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 hours long. And during those, you get the conditions are building up for the possibility for a mixed phase eruption of Penta. The sawmill erupts, it loses its water. And if you listen to it just after the sawmill starts, it's usually got lots of water in it. It's gurgly, and maybe even spitting. But as sawmill's eruption goes on longer and longer, Penta loses its water, and it just becomes a steamy geyser, just gently steaming, maybe occasional little hissing and steam, but really nothing much going on, and you definitely don't hear the water gurgling. Oval Spring usually drops its water level during the long eruptions, and it will often start to splash at depth. Generally angled as you're standing on the water looking at it, they're angled from right to left. Sometimes they're quite strong, they can reach out at the crater, but often they're just hitting the other side wall of the crater. During the long eruption, the spasmodic's going too. It can erupt for hours along with sawmill. and it will slowly lose some water too, particularly in the right vent as you look at it from the boardwalk. But also the left vent drops a little bit too, and you start to see some of the rocks on the edge of the crater exposed. Also, along with tardy, at the start of a normal eruption, it's not unusual to see tardy eruptions lasting a minute or more. But as you get longer in the normal eruption, typically what I expect to see is tardy just splashing frequently. It'll just splash up, one or two splashes, and stop, and then maybe a minute or two later it does another one or two splashes. It becomes very frequent, not really something you can log as eruptions. I'd usually give up trying to log it at that point. And then twilight spring, which is the other friend in the area, it usually will lose a little bit of its water, still be way up on the rock pillars in the crater, but it does tend to drop a little bit as the sawmill eruption progresses. So you can kind of look, if you get used to looking at the group, you can look for these indicators that you're in a long sawmill eruption. And then you basically have to wait for them to quit and the group to eventually have a deep drain. And you wait, and you wait. So sometimes it's a lot of hours. But if you're sitting at ground and you're there for a nice D9 or 10 interval, then you can keep an eye on sawmill and maybe see when it quits. So here's the best chance for you to see a mixed phase eruption. So the best chance is when sawmill quits first. So ahead of spasmodic. So then usually twilight will stay up, which I think helps with keeping water in the system. And then you usually I usually like to see spasmodic quit within about 20 minutes. Because then the system is setting itself up to go into a conventional deep drain type of activity. But you really, for the best chances, twilight won't have drained yet. So sometimes twilight will go down fairly quickly, but if it stays up, you've got your best chance for a mixed phase eruption. And then that's usually about 10 to 20 minutes after spasmodic has quit. Penta will start to huff some steam, which has been very common in history for its to have a steam phase eruption where it just huffs and huffs and huffs steam. And then it might start a mixed phase eruption. You hear it do some deep throat gurgling, and then it can start an eruption. Sometimes it doesn't do anything. You don't even get the steam phase, and sometimes you do get the steam phase. But there've been quite a lot of mixed phase eruptions in the last couple of years. When it does, they're kind of cool to watch. I've got a video that will show you a couple of the eruptions in a minute. So your next best opportunity is if spasmodic quits first. You can still get a mixed phase eruption, but you really need sawmill to quit pretty soon. Usually when spasmodic quits, twilight starts to go down. And sawmill doesn't always quit very quickly. It's really erupting too much at the moment. So if sawmill quits within about 10 minutes, you've again still got a good chance to get a Penta Mixed Phase eruption. Hopefully twilight doesn't go down too fast. If it drains right after spasmodic goes down, you usually don't have much of a chance for mixed phase eruptions, but you don't have to stick around too long to find out. And I've also, as with any of these geyser systems, there are always exceptions. I have seen one mixed phase eruption when sawmill quit, but spasmodic was still going. So you don't necessarily have to wait for spasmodic to quit. But typically you're looking 15 minutes after the pair of them have quit. So if you're at ground and you notice that sawmill has quit and you know it's been gone for a long time, you can always wander over and look at Penta. It's really cool geyser. All right, so mixed phases. There's quite a wide range of circumstances for the mixed phase. Some of them are really strong, where you get roaring steam and water out of all the vents. And the durations tend to be like 10 to 15 minutes. It doesn't tend to last much longer than that. Again, you watch the long sawmill quit. Some of them are smaller. So I'm going to show you two videos. The first one is a nice strong eruption taken in the summertime. You can see the front vents are all active and pooling water. Water can flow all the way onto the bridge. So they're pretty exciting, and lots of action out of all the vents. As I say, the water can flow all the way under the bridge, so it can deceive people into thinking there might have been a full up water phase eruption. Um, and really, to get the full impact of the noise, you need to watch the video with your volume turned up really high because it is quite noisy. The second one I'm going to show you is a weak eruption, mixed phase eruption, where you really only get activity out of the main vent. But one of the things that's interesting about this one is that there's actually an oval spring full pool eruption going on in the background that's actually stronger than normal. So I'll play this one. And so a big difference in the Penta Mixed Phase eruption strength. The first one was very vigorous, roaring a lot and lots of water. Second one, not too much water, but still quite vigorous out of the main vent. And I think on the second one, it was one of those unusual days when just about everything erupted in the Sawmill group, with the possible exception of Churn and Uncertain, I think, at that time. But we got like Old Tardy Drain, Bulger's Hole, Dogbone, Thumbing Hole. So all sorts of things were going on in the group that day. So in general, what you look for is the long Sawmill eruption quitting, and you watch for spasmodic quitting. Take a look at Penta. It's easy to see the Sawmills quit from Grand, so keep an eye on it. You'll see me running over, and we do generally it appears Sawmills are erupting too much to give us a chance for full water eruption. So, but I would love to see some of those come back. Of course, today before doing this talk, Penta did have an eruption today. Circumstances looked somewhat more like it could have been a full water phase. There was a tardy eruption that was almost an hour long, and then there was a Penta eruption. So we don't quite know what was going on with the group today, but obviously the Sawmill group can do whatever it wants at times. But the mixed phase one's cool. If I see Sawmill and Spasmodic quit relatively close together um, after a long eruption and there's still water in twilight, I'll usually go on the radio, let people know, because if you're on Geyser Hill or a little bit down basin or waiting for Tilt's baby, you can get over there probably in time to see a mixed phase if it's going to happen. So I like them. I like the little geysers. So anyway, that wraps up what I had wanted to talk about. And yes, willing to answer any questions that anybody has on either of the parts. And if you're talking well, I can't
Yep.
hear.
I'm just waiting for some questions coming here. So, yes, everybody, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. Okay, question here. How much overflow slash runoff do penta mixed phases tend to produce?
Uh, well, as I've shown in these two videos, it can be extremely variable. The one on the right, which was the weak one, it put water around the cone, and depending on the wind, it can blow a fair amount of distance. But it doesn't really get much beyond the flat rock uh, right in front of the Penta sign. So sometimes you don't even see water heading down the runoff channel in this direction very much at all. So the weak ones don't necessarily put out enough water to really create a lot of runoff. Then there's a whole range of strengths to them. The strongest ones I've seen have melted all the snow down and underneath the boardwalk, and then all the way out so that it's flowing out in the runoff channel that Spasmodic and Twilight use. So it can flow all the way down a river. And that's why I say that sometimes I know I've seen that before and wondered whether there's been a major eruption, but then I've seen these mixed phases that are really strong, and I know that they can create just as much wash and snowmelt in the runoff channels. And you can see the activity out of the vents is pretty vigorous on that first video there. So it's highly variable from not much to all the way down the river.
Okay, another question for you. Last year I saw a mixed phase which was concerted with uncertain. Would you consider that to be unusual slash weird or just uncommon?
Yeah, so I would consider that uncommon. I don't think I've seen one. I've seen quite a few mixed phase eruptions, and timing wise, that's not consistent with what I described. So this is the most common mode that you can get the mixed phase eruption. Typically your uncertain eruption is 2 hours or ish, maybe after you've had a deep drain. So these that I'm describing here, the most commonly observed, are very soon after the deep drain happens. So I would say that's definitely not the most common behavior, but sawmill group can do whatever it wants. But what I've described is the one that seems to be the most common behavior in the last couple of years.
Mm, okay.
And again, also on that note, the second video I showed where you got the mixed phase occurring with a full oval spring having a high pole eruption, that is also not the typical behavior because oval doesn't usually have a full pool around this time when the group's going into a deep drain. So that was another one. That was an unusual situation within the sawmill group.
Okay. If anybody has any further questions, go ahead and get those in here, and we'll get them answered. Okay. think with that, we will go ahead and call that a wrap for our entire presentation series. I would like to thank all of our presenters once again for presenting and sharing the wealth of information that our community has across many people. And we will be announcing our plans for next year and be if you guys want to if you have an idea for a presentation, feel free to reach out to any of the board members or any of our officers, and we can bounce ideas off, and so you can prepare things over the summer. And with that, we will call that a wrap, and thank you all for participating, and we'll see you all out there this summer.